host these conversations and these webinars that allow us to dive a bit deeper. And the objective that we have today, objective number 3, that seeks to provide accurate and timely information at all stages of migration. So that's the objective that we're diving into today. And we are delighted to have a very elaborate panel, a stellar panel, if I must say, that covers a spectrum of the migrants' journey that is really looking at the points in the migrants' journey where they would require assistance from a different host of actors. So we're delighted that we are joined by a panel speakers and panel members who are going to speak into these different subjects. My name is Paddy Sianga Knudsen, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. So just to introduce our panel, and maybe just before I do that, a bit of housekeeping. We do know that the room does fill up. I can see the room filling up and more people coming through. So it's great to see everybody's faces, but it's also nice if we can have our microphones muted while we're not taking the floor. We will have an opportunity for Q&A later on, in which you'll be able to ask your questions. But in the meantime, the chat box remains available for you to reflect, for you to share ideas of what's happening in your corner of the world, in your localities. That's the idea as well, that we are also hearing from the ground in terms of the objective that we have and the thematic topic that we have in front of us. So you are welcome to use the chat box to share those reflections. Coming to our panel, I'm glad to see that we are joined by Ms. Lorena Lando, who is the Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration in Nepal. And we have Mr. Akhil, who is a researcher from the International Institute of Migration and Development. He's based in India. And we have Ms. Rossitz Mandy, who is a researcher with Project Digital Active Women based in Germany. And we also have Mr. Ramon Sanahuye Velez, who is an expert on local administration of migrants and refugees, and he is based in Spain, but covering quite a wide spectrum of work within Europe. And we also have Dr. Aaron Diaz Menduburo, who is a lecturer at the Center for Research on North America, and he also doubles as an independent documentary and filmmaker. So we'll be enlightened by some of the work that he has done, both in his work as a documentarist, but also from his experience on the line of working with migrants. And so with that, just checking again, that all our panelists are here with us. Dr. Diaz, are you here? Just checking that you're here with us as we proceed. Okay, we will hear from him. It's just about morning in the Americas, so that's absolutely fine. I guess he's grabbing his coffee. Let's kick off with Ms. Lorena Lando, and let me just introduce her. So she's the Chief of Mission at the International Organization for Migration in Nepal, and she's been there for the last 2 years, so really arriving at the peak, I guess, or just before the pandemic was hitting, and she has been working before in Sri Lanka, in France, in Afghanistan. She's also covered quite a range of programs in Iraq, in Jordan, in the Balkans, in Timor-Leste, Liberia, Central America, and her work has, covered a wide spectrum of issues. So whether we're talking on the development side or on the humanitarian side of work. So she's been advocating for migrants' rights, migrants' protection, and highlighting the contribution that migrants make to development since she joined IOM in 2000. She's a holder of an international postgraduate diploma in humanitarian assistance from the US, and also with her quite a wide range of experience from peacekeeping in the socioeconomics with languages, and she is of Italian nationality, but as you have heard, sounds like a citizen of the world. So with that, Lorena, do you just want to kick us off for a lot of the students that are in the room and for other people that are joining us in trying to understand, in setting this objective, for Objective 3, trying to ensure that, you know, information provision for migrants is available along the pathway of their journeys. What did the process really look like? And you can pick from any experience in terms of setting objectives around the Global Compact for Migration. And you can pick from any experience from the countries that you have been involved in. Lorena, over to you. Lorena, do we have you with us? Just checking maybe the audio. Rakesh, can you spot Lorena? I don't seem to find her in the participants list. Maybe her connection fell off.
Okay, I think I can now. I didn't have power to unmute myself. So you keep all the power on your end. So
I'm sorry about that.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody that is joining this webinar. I think, first of all, I would like really to thank for such an effort and bringing the discussion on GCM with so many people, so much interest, whether it's from academia, but as well as civil society and students looking into the question. So, well, as you pointed out, the Global Compact for Migration was adopted in December 2018. And even that process was really almost more than a year of discussion to reach the adoption in December 2018. At that time, I was serving in Tunisia, and definitely there was a lot of discussion both in terms of national consultation, and this consultation reaching out to civil society, reaching out to migrant associations, reaching out to government, and across the different ministry in the government. And I think that was very much in academia. So definitely there was a lot of different visions on what migration is. It was also continued with consultation at regional level. And I think these are even more powerful discussions, because when we talk, the Global Compact for Migration, and we came to that, considering how international migration needs to be addressed from the position of a country of origin, the transit countries, as much as the destination countries. Mobility has been there forever. It's nothing of a new phenomenon. On the other hand, I think there is probably no subject that's more politicized than migration. So we do have it as a subject that is picked up always, any given time, by countries in terms of particularly host countries. And I think what it is that while, and then we go to Objective 3, but in the sense that while migrants are there are 284 million migrants across the world. What we also see is that much more attention is given to migrants in irregular status. So those that cross border probably in a much more challenging situations. When we see the situation of, even particularly in the Mediterranean, as I said, when I was there from 2011 to 2019, definitely was at the time of massive situation of rescue at sea, Mare Nostrum for Europe, and addressing the needs of, of people at sea, and how this turn and what we see today, actually, when it comes to the same area, the same regions, where the engagement is very different. And I think this is very important to look at. And I think this is part of the discussion in terms of GCM. Now, Global Compact for Migration, the adoption is over 170 countries by now. So not every single country, but definitely the vast majority. And what it requires is really looking at what is my interest as a country, but what we try to pass as a message is a comprehensive approach to the management of international migration. So that's something that require efforts, but I believe there is also many more benefit than losses when it comes to the good governance of migration. And this cooperation on this governance of migration definitely have to engage countries from different destinations. Today, we will look more precisely on objective number 3, so provide accurate and timely information at all stages of migration. I cannot say it better. My experience from all these years of work with migrants, and as much as IOM works in terms of policy advocacy and technical assistance to government, we really work a lot even with civil society and with migrants themselves. So in Tunisia, definitely the program of protection of migrants stranded in Tunisia was very important, was very large, from the rescue at sea of once they reach the shores, all the way to actually looking at what is the situation, what is healthcare, or as well as the local integration of the return, the safe return. Or at some point, even we had family reunification with some of these rescue at sea, that some people managed to reach Europe and some people were actually saved in Tunisia. So there's very, many different aspects, and we are talking about people's lives. So what is important is this has to be the core of all our efforts, is that we are talking about human lives. And if we take an approach that is based on fundamental human right, this fundamental human right is for everybody. It's not just a pick and choose, but it should be for everybody an approach to our work. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. Do we need to give up? No, we can't give up. But I think it's important that this process, and I think a lot of us, even in the, when we see today with the colleagues who are, talking and sharing experience in the research or, on their work, I think that we can always find areas where there is elements that we feel that is not going the way it is going. But I think what is important is the dialogue needs to be there. My experience, even with COVID, probably is something that maybe we have time to talk a little bit later also, but I think COVID showed again how information is important and how information must reach migrants. When we saw the very beginning, nobody knew what was going on with COVID, what is the impact, how long will it be? We saw the migrants were definitely not on the front of the worries of any countries in the host countries. So the situation was very much living at the mercy of the people. And I think even in that case, our experience as IOM, for instance, was definitely to reach out to migrants in host country, like the national language and messages was through the network of civil society and IOM offices in the different countries, to making sure that communication on COVID was reaching them as well. And then, of course, the information how to do if you are stranded, if you need help. Because what we also look at is that migrants that need more support are the migrants in the most vulnerable situations. I think those maybe the language skills is still weak, the one who just arrived in the countries, maybe also those undocumented migrants that actually still and are in different countries and need to be supported. Or those who are actually even human trafficked, smuggled into situations, they expected to be somewhere else and they find themselves in the countries that definitely don't know where to start and probably without resources to take any substantial actions for themselves. So resilience is there from migrants, but definitely there is also work that needs to be done from the host countries as well as the country of departures, the country of origin. And I think that information starts with the pre-departures, an informed decision is what we need, all of us. And I think we do that even when we go on holidays. So imagine if we should not do that when we go for such a big decision as a migration experience abroad. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I may leave it there and leave it.
I think you have kicked us off very well, Lorena, in sort of talking about the need for information. I mean, we know that IOM has quite and working with some different actors around preparation of supporting migrants to prepare for embarking on new journeys, whether they are and particularly this is to do with labor migration. And just zeroing in on that, and maybe I want to come sort of to the other end of it. The mass flows of returnees from Nepal. We have read, about how migrants coming from India, for instance, I think you had over 500,000 plus, but I think you have more accurate figures than I would, returning from India, coming back to Nepal. So what kind of preparedness do you sort of see in terms of the local actors as well? And here we're talking about, you know, the receptiveness of local authorities for these returning migrants. We always see migrants going out, and they're our heroes, they're providers, they give us remittances. But we've heard how different countries almost had a backlash to, you know, to migrants coming back and sort of saying, where are they going? You know, where are they going to live? What are they going to do? How are we going to manage it? Both coming from the government level, but all the way also to communities. So, you know, any comments and reflections in terms of the preparedness and the kind of information that's provided to migrants as they are returning?
So definitely in 2020, there was a huge influx, and some region were extremely, region of the Tarai region is also, in addition to 13 official entry points, Nepal has many also, informal crossing. There's an excellent relations with India in terms of free movement, a little bit of like a Schengen, we may say. So in the sense that there is definitely, since 1956, so it's actually a very historical freedom of movement between countries. However, the situation when it comes to people getting sick, and we knew, and that was the other one, the stigma about migrants bringing COVID to Nepal. So our work was also that one, to try to stop this kind of concern, or sort of trying to really make quick judgment on migrants are the one bringing all the problems, even if they were Nepali going back home and with the right to go back to their home countries. But we saw even in Europe how people were stranded out of their own places because at one point the borders were all closed. Here was definitely a huge number. So they did try. I think Nepal tried to create quarantine centers where people could stay. Some, I would say that some provincial, authority were better. Maybe they did a different analysis. They were better prepared. They looked into it in more details and felt like there's no point in providing poor quality quarantine centers just to hold them there for 14 days without easy control of the situations, if they have ability to stay at home and in an isolated manner, or quarantine at home safely. So I think that was also part of the lessons learned in terms of, they made available schools, they made available different sites. But I think it was important to have enough also, that was the challenge, is, antigen testing, is there COVID or, PCR testing. So there were quite many elements there, but I think they came through. And then what was realized that as soon migrants went back to India, and they didn't stay forever in Nepal, maybe also because traditionally is a circular migration. So they came back at the moment that there was not much information and concern about being sick, but then eventually from India, I would say that the flow restarted. It was a different story when it comes to migrants coming back from the Gulf, from other countries, where definitely the government also asked our support, and that was to bring them back. Those who needed it finished, they didn't have any longer their contracts, they couldn't stay in the countries. You may remember IOM was definitely advocating for countries to maintain their workforces and not sort of get into whether it was detention, whether it was to force return. So I think there was advocacy, definitely was there, medical care if needed. We know that if not everybody is safe, nobody's safe. And I think this continues to be the discussion even when it comes to vaccinations, because we see that many countries, while they struggle to have sufficient vaccine in some countries, I think that we should look in terms of priority, where people work, what kind of age groups, etc., so that then we minimize the risk of COVID spreading based on the work we do and of frontline workers. And so I think that's something that is also again including the migrants as part of that process in communities. So that's a policy that is decision taken by governments. So I think that in terms of return and assistance, that is very important. We work with embassies, we work with IOM offices in Malaysia and different countries where Nepalis were. And so to make sure that they were also informed what can be done if they needed to come back precisely because of being stranded. And I think in that place, in that role for Nepal, also the Nepali, the non-resident Nepali association, so the diaspora, big associations, was very much involved with their network and presence in so many different countries to actually also assist stranded migrants, stranded Nepali abroad. So I think in terms of information, that was very much, we went through digital radio, through network of NGOs. In Nepal, also another important piece was the coordination. So we were leading the coordination of, with the association working on migrants, and they were the one also bringing the concern and lobbying and advocating together for the attention to the migrants stranded abroad. Those who can do well, they are self-sufficient and they definitely take care of themselves. We do have a responsibility as government to take care of our citizens also if they need help, and see what can be done to bring them back home, if that's the reality and the solution, the best solutions. And at the same time informing what, for instance, in case of COVID, was definitely informing what it is, what can happen, etc. So making sure there was as much information out there as possible, and working with partners for sure.
Lorena, I think you have sort of also introduced what we often see with the GCM objectives, that there is quite an interrelation and interlink between them, just speaking into, issues that are related to vulnerability, issues that are related to partnership, which I guess is, the very last objective that sort of looks like a whole host of actors that come together for approaches that are not just whole of society based approach, whole of government approach, but that really are also speaking to the needs of the migrants. And I think that some of what you have outlined in Nepal fits and represents, of course, some challenges, like you have said, often remain, and these gaps always remain an opportunity for us to do better. I will come back to you, I think, in a little while, but I think since we are talking about returns and talking about India, I wonder if I can cross over to Akhil, and Akhil, just to, as you are unmuting there, I'm just going to introduce Akhil. Like I mentioned, he's a researcher who is based in India, and he associates with organizations like the International Institute of Migration and Development, as well as the Center for Indian Migrant Studies. He has worked also closely with one of the partner organizations, so both the International Institute of Migration and Development, as well as the Migrant Forum in Asia, are co-organizers of this session. And he has written quite widely on international labor migration, decentralization, sort of also on other issues that are related to political economy. Akhil, as we are bringing you on, and I know that some of your very important work has sort of zeroed in on Kerala, and Kerala has come up in a lot of conversations as sort of this center place where we can draw some best practices. But I guess, as a researcher, maybe you also have some other reservations that come with it in terms of understanding what the gaps are like. But we were wondering, in terms of the global compact for migration objective that we have in front of us, what challenges in ensuring accurate and timely information for Indian migrants, what challenges do you see in that area? And also maybe if you could run through for us, how informed are Indian migrants during the various stages of migration? Over to you, Akhil.
Thank you, Paddy, and thanks for this opportunity. Yeah, okay, let me quickly focus on the challenges faced by the Indian migrants, and these are challenges generally faced by migrants from most of the origin countries in the global south. So, lack of accurate and relevant information always reproduces the vulnerabilities that migrant faces in the various stages of migration. And as Lorena rightly pointed out, it often leads to human trafficking, forced labor, and debt bondage, and other labor rights violations. Now, keeping these things in mind, when we discuss, the information platform or information provision in the largest sending country, things are no different. Even though India has certain constraints or barriers such as, the concentration of migration in certain pockets and large presence of subagents and lack of accessibility to telecommunication facilities and other information platforms, we can see that, we should not think just, about availability of information and lack of information. We should think beyond the binaries, and there are, other type of issues such as, irrelevant and overloaded information. That is a major issue when it comes to the information provisions. And of course, misinformation is there. And more than that, there are poor information that contains, only a certain aspect of the necessary information. And most importantly, there is denial of access to information. So these are the, certain kind of characteristics that are most familiar with the, origin countries or migrants from the origin countries in the global south. But India's information platforms / professions are obviously weak compared to other major countries of origin. We can't say that, we have good, or comprehensive information platforms that cater the need of migrant workers. When we see, stage-wise situation of Indian migrants, we can see that, the situation of prospective Indian migrants, their choices are often decided by misinformation or the information provided by subagents or their relatives or returning migrants, etc. There, in such situations, the trust often overpowers the information or the reliable information. That is a common issue that is found at the stage of pre-employment or pre-decision making in a origin country like India. And pre-departure stage, as a number of countries have good PDO, pre-departure orientation programs and setups that try to provide a certain necessary information for the migrant workers. When it comes to India and a few other origin countries, they hardly do these PDOs or pre-departure orientation programs for the namesake, and they try to kind of provide information within a span of couple of hours or a few days information that is often that is supposed to cater the needs of migrant workers throughout their migration journey. So that is the major problem there in the pre-departure period. When we analyze the pre-departure situation, we can see that it is mainly with the modules we have, and then the learning techniques we have, and trainers. These are the three aspects that need to be seriously considered when a country like India plans to develop pre-departure orientation programs, because the learning techniques are still classroom techniques that is no more, that may not work well with the migrant workers who has very less education or illiterate. So that is a major aspect. And trainers are often selected by, in India, it is the training is mostly done by the recruitment agents, selected by the recruitment agents themselves. And there are no narratives or no voices of migrant workers or the returnees or the existing migrant workers in the destination countries. There is no sharing of experience and etc. That works well when it comes to information sharing. And but post-arrival strategies are, we could see that number of missions, Indian missions and missions of other countries are also doing quite well in disseminating information through their websites and etc. But the major problem there is the lack of accessibility to the technology platforms, so the telecommunication facilities for these migrant workers, especially for the domestic workers and low-skilled workers who hardly have any access to the information platforms due to the work life they have at the destination countries. And another aspect is that, and it's a common issue across the origin countries, that is all this information is still information dissemination is still revolving around packaged or packets, information packets, and which is often overloaded with a lot of information, and sometimes it even contains irrelevant information. So we should start thinking beyond the packets or packaged information. And Another issue when it comes to the information dissemination is the accessibility of information. There are a lot of information here and there, but people are not able to access, especially at the destination country. People are not able to access the available information. There are, as I said earlier, there are these reasons that prevent them from accessing information. So the policymakers and the stakeholders should not stop at just providing information, but they should make sure that these information are accessible. And there are efforts like comprehensive information orientation programs, etc. But in countries like India and other South Asian countries also, there is no harmonization of these information platforms at various stages. Please stop me if I'm too fast. I thought I'll just quickly go through the challenges and then we can have a discussion on it further. I have few more points. And another issue when it comes to implementation of these information platforms or programs is participation of non-state stakeholders. India is a classic example in that aspect, because in India, recruitment agents are the only agencies that are involving in the pre-departure orientation or any kind of orientation in association with the national government. And there are some CSOs that are providing micro orientation programs at a minimal scale, but beyond that there is no contribution from non-stakeholders. At the destination countries, and the pandemic also shown the importance of diaspora organization that can better disseminate information better compared to the Indian missions through their WhatsApp groups and other social media platforms, are in person also. And so these actors also should be considered when it comes to the information provision or information dissemination programs. And obviously pre-return is an important aspect that is only, I think only the Philippines has a pre-return initiative that provides some information for the migrant workers in the pre-return stage. And considering the temporariness of international migration, especially in the South Asia GCC corridor, it's important to have proper information in the pre-return period as well. And COVID also showcased how bad is our information systems are when it comes to the base theft that millions of migrant workers experience. They hardly had any information about the access to grievance mechanisms and legal justice mechanism. They all lost millions of money in terms of wages and in the service benefits. And many didn't have information about the repatriation programs and how to register for the repatriation and whom to approach and how to fill up the application forms, etc. Even they do not know the basic aspects of repatriation, etc. And when it comes to return and reintegration, also many India especially repatriated closely 2 million migrant workers, and they hardly had any idea how to reintegrate back to the society and how to think about remigration, etc. COVID actually showcased the bottlenecks we have when it comes to the information provision. So I'll just stop here and yeah.
Akhil, thank you. I think it's very interesting to get an outline of the challenges, because I think as we are speaking in the conversation now, it's sort of an opportunity for us to unpack them. And I think some very interesting points you've sort of raised there in terms of participation, access, issues that are related to the fact that the way we organize information could either lead to an overload of information or misinformation or actually poor information as well. And I'm just trying to think from kind of the work that you have done around the migration corridor. So we're talking the GCC and South Asia there. Where do you sort of see are kind of the best practices that we could also pick up as we have unpacked some of these issues? You've talked about, for instance, where the use of recruitment agencies that are really providing a service. I mean, I would say it's more of an extended service right to their clients rather than to the migrants. So how do we bring together actors as well that would channel information that's kind of relevant for the migrant for where they're going, but also kind of moves away from just a bonus or a service that allows them to sort of pack them off, but actually give them enough information that provides a good settling, a good introduction to how you would integrate and settle before you kind of step foot into the rest of the architecture in the host country. Maybe just if you could answer on that, and then I know we will unpack some of the other issues later. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I'll just stick on a particular question. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's very difficult often to integrate these other actors. That is true. So the policymakers are also often finding it very difficult. In India, as I said, told you earlier, it's not a mandatory provision that migrants should get any kind of pre-departure orientation or trainings, and that the responsibility is vested with the recruitment agents. It's a decision by the government, and historically also Indian government is very reluctant to incorporate non-state stakeholders, especially the CSOs and trade unions. They have a huge role to play, especially in the grassroots level, to identify the stakeholders to whom we should approach for who need the provisions. Because for us, especially if we are talking in terms of Kerala. In Kerala, the migration started in the 1970s, and that time it was just low skill migration. Now Kerala is mostly focusing on most of the Keralites are semi-skilled or high skill migrants. So I don't think they need any kind of, most of them do not require any kind of pre-departure orientation or pre-employment orientation on how to migrate and what are the challenges and what are the situations existing at the destination country, etc. But there are still vulnerable groups that needs to be identified, and the training that they require is maybe different from the migrants in other Indian state. So in those aspects, the state or the government can actually rely on the civil society organizations to pick these pockets and the vulnerable migrants who actually require the information. And at the destination country, as I said earlier, during COVID actually, showcased how important is the role of the diaspora organization or the migrant organizations. They have access to these migrants even at the labor camps and at the remote places, etc. So again, to reach out to the beneficiaries, it's important to kind of collaborate with and recognize the work of these migrant organizations and that for organizations that are doing. These are two quick examples that comes into mind. Hope that answers your question.
No, thanks a lot, Akhil. And just as we will switch over, I just wanted to check if Dr. Diaz, did you manage to connect? Apologies for those for that miscommunication on the connection. Are you there?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. No, that's good to have you.
Okay,
good to have you. Okay. I think before we come to you, Dr. Diaz, I just wondered if we could have a look. Rakesh, I don't know if you are ready on the technical side to just show us a clip of a very short video. And I think there'll be trailers there about one or 2 minutes. Just indulge with us, because I think it's also good for us to move in this interactive style. Rakesh, just let me know if you're ready to play the video, and we can go ahead, and then I will introduce Dr. Diaz. Rakesh, are you good to go? Just checking on the some few technical glitches, but we are still here.
Yeah, no problem. I can wait, and then I can talk a little bit about what are we gonna see if you want. No problem at all.
Actually, then let us just go ahead. Let's go straight into it, and maybe you can just give us a teaser, rather, from the trailer that you're about to show us. And I thought that would give us a bit of an introduction to why you have us here. But anyway, before that, let me just introduce then to our panelists and also to the participants here. So Dr. Diaz is with the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and there is a center that predominantly works on research on North America, and he is he has he's also been working as an independent filmmaker, and he has directed a couple of films, Migrants Who Come From Within. He's also done one on Perspectives that looks at temporal migration in Canada. as well as one on migrant mother. And he has been a visiting researcher at a couple of universities in Canada, as well as in other parts. And also his focus has really been on looking at temporal migrant workers in Canada, their families and their host communities. He has done publications in health that are related to health, education, social representations, as well as intercultural relations. And he holds a PhD in anthropology, as well as a master's in social work. So maybe Dr. Diaz, do you just want to take us through in terms of, understanding the work on the Americas, and particularly also drawing on this experience and the work that you have done around the different films? What does it look like in terms of information that is provided to migrants along their journey?
Well, I will talk specifically with the migrant workers. They have a work permit, they go to Canada, and really they don't get, I would say, almost any kind of information to go to Canada. They try to give some talks in the Ministry of Labor, is the organization that send migrants to Canada, and they talk mostly information about behavior, as kind of control the workers in Canada to be very professionals and very profiles and very productive, So I attend some of the meetings, and just is like you have to be a good worker, don't be rude with your coworkers. So that kind of information. So not really related with the human rights, labor rights, chemics, pesticides, not sexual information is very important, not just for the workers, also for the families, Information related with emotions, for example, because they go a year after year for around 6 or 8 months, They stay in Canada and they back for 4 months. So my postdoc was related with that. Of course, they travel with their emotion and with the sexual life, but they don't talk about that. Sometimes, it's often that they can establish relationships, sexual, emotional relationships in Canada, and also the partners in Mexico. But anyone talks about this, it's still a taboo. So I discovered that, and that's why I decided to do my last documentary. I really want to focus in the sexual and emotions under this labor context, this transnational context, this temporary context, what's going on with your intimacy. So I was trying to do, I did my research related with that topic, but I want to make a movie related with that. But when I start making a movie and then I start thinking again and again, I think will be, if I made this movie, I will make more vulnerable the migrants, because this topic is still an issue. So probably with a movie, you just spread and then you don't know what will going on, what happened. So and also I decided to change the topic, and then I focus on maternity, because also the migrants which I started working, the women, they start answer my question related with sexuality and emotions, but also their narratives start really focus more in maternity. What's the meaning of being mother abroad? So I say, wait a minute. My idea was that as a researcher at the beginning, but the reality is another. So I will, of course, change the subject. And then I talk with them and I focus, and they say, yes, we would like to talk more about this maternity and the meaning of maternity abroad. So I changed the meaning because of the necessity, because of the ethics, because I discovered that will be less less painful and less probably damage for the migrants to share this kind of narratives and other more intimacy, you know. So yeah, that's so and then I back to the Ministry of Labor and say, you know, I discovered this, I did this. I can be a volunteer with you here sharing what information really they needed, you know, but they really never opened the door for this kind of, you know, for this kind of idea, you know. They say, oh, it's good, your work, but they are afraid. They don't want to, you know, to move anything, just the status quo as they send it. They are really good sending people, you know. They are very good in the administration, you know. The farmers in Canada, they are just happy with the Mexican government, you know. They are doing pretty good job in this way, but the other is like, you know, it's just falling, you know. Yeah.
Dr. Diaz, quite interesting actually to sort of hear the, you know, the spin of the use of arts and culture, I think in the way they play in terms of information. And I think, like, we were listening to Akil and Lorena as well, in terms of, you know, being innovative and using the creative industries and how you channel the right information. I mean, I'm thinking back to having worked in China and the role of the mobile phone. You know, I mean, it's an absolutely essential. It's almost as though the television has been eroded out of the system, because people can watch everything from the news to you know, to taking a flight to making very important decisions, all from their mobile phones. And I think it's kind of interesting to hear how the arts and the creative industry can be used in terms of ensuring that the right kind of information is being shared. So we will come back again to you, and then now I just thought that I take a moment and get into Europe, because we haven't heard from our European counterparts who are on the panel today. And I would just like to introduce to you Rossitz, Mandy Rossitz. I don't know how I'm getting tongue twisted when pronouncing your name. And she is a Bulgarian Nigerian translator. She's an interpreter and also an activist. And she's a researcher that is working on a project known as Digital Active Women at Minor. And I will let her explain what the project is about, but it centers around education and research based out of Berlin. And, you know, they are kind of looking at the improvement of digital information and counseling services that are aimed at newly arrived migrant women in Germany. And she has worked as an online counselor for Bulgarian migrant workers in Germany, specializing in labor rights and social security, as well as on other projects that looked at particularly, you know, increasing political and civic participation of people with migration biographies in Germany. She has worked, specialized in Latin American studies, and is also the co-founder and vice president of the German-Bulgarian Feminist Association in Berlin. Rossitz, just thinking about, you know, walk us through Project Digital Active Women. Why digital? You know, why is this sort of a main feature of the project? And, you know, why target women and the interlinkage sort of between targeting women and the use of digital technology?
Thank you very much for the great introduction, Patty, and hello to everyone from a very sunny afternoon in Berlin. I'm very, very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about our project, because Digital Active Women is a project, excuse me, that only started this year, actually. So we're very much in the starting phase, in the launching of our activities. So we're in the middle of everything that's happening and all the fascinating findings that we're seeing along the way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a brief summary of what the project is about, and then break it down keyword by keyword, why these features are actually so important for us. So as you already said previously, our project is on the one hand targeted at newly migrated women in Germany, but on the other hand is actually reaching out to the stakeholders whose job is to inform and counsel those migrant women. So what we're doing is we are actually focusing on how can those services be improved? How can that information and counseling services be tailored more to the needs of newly migrated women, so that they're actually reaching that target group, and so that they actually help to support the integration, inclusion, and participation within the society. So let me break down that entire concept that we're applying. Why digital? I guess digital is kind of a buzzword lately. Everyone is talking about digital this, digital that. So some people might even ask, are you just trying to be fashionable? Why only focus on that? And here's the truth. Where are we right now? How are we talking? How did you find my contact? How did everyone apply for their job? How do you choose what car to buy, what washing machine to buy? We're all constantly online. We all have mobile phones or smartphones. So the digital aspect is really impossible to be separated from any real life experiences. So since it is so omnipresent, then we're not being serious when we're talking about we're actually trying to inform people. If we're not being there where people are looking for information. Because what other minor projects are actually showing, we've got other projects that are looking at different aspects of how to inform different migrant communities. They've actually shown that when people newly arrive here, if they need to know something about where to find accommodation, work, anything at all, first, they ask friends if they have any. And then the other things are Google or Facebook. Actually, a lot of people do not know that there are welcome centers. They do not know that there are counseling services. They don't know that there are migrant organizations that could provide them with information. They just don't know. Why don't they know? Because the stakeholders who are supposed to inform people do not do a great job in letting people know that they actually exist. So what's actually happening is a lot of institutions, they will have one website and they'll tell you they have a digital service already. But this website, no one can find that website because they haven't worked properly with the keywords, for example. The website is only available in German. And for newly migrated people, this is just not really that useful, or maybe there is just English or maybe 2 languages, or maybe the website is completely chaotic and it's really difficult to navigate. So if that website is unusable, or even the language that's used to describe things is so complicated, as Aaron was talking earlier, sometimes information is just not understandable, even if it's in our language, then basically the information is non-existent. And for this reason, we really took that digital aspect very seriously, because also Germany, even though it's the strongest economy within the European Union, when it comes to being a digital country, it's very further down the list in comparison to other countries. So there are really not that many digital counseling opportunities for newly arrived people here. So there is a huge gap in that. So my next point is why women? Because some people might very legitimately ask, hey, don't men need information? Don't all people need information? Why are you only targeting women? Isn't that like kind of not very logical? And here's what I'm going to explain. We actually also have other projects that are looking at or targeting everyone and all genders. However, what our studies have shown is that actually the majority of people who are looking for information online here in Germany are actually women. And actually, they're not only looking for themselves, they're also looking for the rest of their families. And what's actually the case, very often, the woman is responsible for the integration of the whole family. That is what's happening. And actually, a lot of the services are not tailored to the specific needs of that group. And what do I mean by specific needs? Because obviously, when you need accommodation, it's not like there is a house for a woman and a house for a man. What that means is that, let's say, a lot of counseling services, they would only offer appointments in person. And those appointments in person would be, let's say, between 10 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What do you do if you have a job? Because we actually did a survey. Over 80% of the women who replied to our survey, they're actually working. More than 50% have kids or have families in that country. Most of them, a very high percentage of them were highly educated with bachelor's degrees and above. So we're also seeing like a discrepancy in the profile that people expect. But if you're working, if you have a family, if you're doing a language course, an appointment at 3 p.m. in the afternoon during the week is just not going to be helpful for you. So that service is not tailored to your reality. It's not meeting you where you are. So not offering an online alternative in a different way through a chat app or anything else is just losing the opportunity to provide the necessary information. So that's why we are looking specifically at women right now to see how the different services can be tailored to their realities, to their needs as well. Because once they're tailored for specific groups as well, then also the generic services are also more inclusive from the information they receive from the really targeted projects. Yeah. And then the third important point I would like to mention is our approach. How do we actually decide what is more efficient, what is better information, what works? We're actually using the citizen science approach, which is a very, I'm very fascinated by that approach because especially here in Germany, I mean, citizen science has been around since the 90s. However, this is a type of approach that's been mainly used by the natural sciences. What's citizen science? It's basically involving people who do not come from academia, who come from any other backgrounds within the research. It could be at any stage, it could be for collecting data, it could be for publishing, it could be at any stage. But up until now, it was mainly natural sciences doing this, you know, taking a lot of people to photograph, migrating butterflies for them or similar projects. And the social sciences or migration studies have not really made that much use of that approach, which is a more bottom-up approach involving the actual people you're doing research for. So in our project, me and my in the project coordinator, Ildiko Palman, we're also working together with almost 50 volunteer co-researchers who are themselves newly migrated women in Germany. Some of them have an academic background or have studied something related to that, but some of them come from completely different backgrounds and have never done surveys or written concepts or anything like that before. So it's their first involvement in this type of academic research. So instead of saying, hey, we are telling you to do this, we actually work together with them and we actually develop the whole questionnaire with those women. They told us, we think we need to frame it like that. We need to ask about this. They did the translation, suggesting which where to spread the questionnaires, which online communities to enter, which platforms would work for which community. Because, for example, for some communities, Facebook is the best to reach them. Most of them are there. For example, Romanians, Polish migrants, you definitely reach them there. But when it comes to, for example, Iranian migrants, then you have to go to Telegram. You know, you're not going to find them on Facebook. So that specific knowledge, we actually got it from them because they know they're the actual experts on their own situation, regardless of what they studied. And that's how they're recognized in that project. And that's why we can then say, okay, if we work together with the people who these services are for, then we could more confidently say that we actually really tried to find out what would work for them indeed and what we think should work. So
well, really, really, really interesting to hear the scope of the project, the methodology that's also being used, but I think also having this very close ear to the voice of the migrant. What is really the need out there? And I think it really fits, you know, with the objective here, you know, the commitment that was sort of made that not just looks at the information being accurate and timely, but we've also talked about it being, you know, sort of the accessibility part. I think that's kind of important. And maybe the next question we will ask you, but we will, you know, we will, before we move on to the next speaker, so you can have a think about this, Rossitz, is sort of also to tell us a bit more about the profile of some of the migrant women that you are looking at, and also thinking about how irregular migrants' needs are also vested in this, because we do know, like you have explained, there could be migrants that are coming in, and I think this is also what Lorena had alluded to, where information is generally available for the regular migrant. I often say that even, you know, I have a Zambian passport coming from a country where you have to fill up tons and tons of visa forms. I mean, it's like a science project between filling a form for a British visa, and then, you know, you've got a lesser of a science project when you have to do a Schengen visa, and then, you know, the Americas and the Australia sit on either side. So even for migrant or for mobility purposes, where it can be quite tedious for us to understand procedures and processes. I know that Germany has moved on to this level of trying to bring in all this information and make it in Germany project, or whichever platforms have been formed to provide information for migrants. But I also wanted to just speak a bit more about yes, the focus on women, but yes, the nature of information that they would actually be looking for. So maybe we can come back a little bit later for us to discuss this and talk about that. And on that, I have seen that Mr. Ramon is here with us, and just turning then the page to Mr. Ramon, who is an independent freelance expert on local administration, migration, and refugee policies that accessing different cities across Europe. So his knowledge on the subject goes beyond his home country, which is Spain, and he's a member of the steering group of the City Initiative on Migrants with Irregular Status in Europe, which is hosted by the University of Oxford campus. And at the same time, he at some point until January 2020, he was the director of Migrants Attention and Welcoming Policies of the city of Barcelona. And among many of the programs, he worked on the Barcelona Refugee City Project. He was also responsible for the one-stop shop for migrants and refugees in the municipality there. And he was also the chairman of the Integration and Migrants Working Group of Eurocities. Mr. Ramon, we are delighted that you could join us, and thank you very much for the flexibility that, we know you were running from one meeting to come and be here with us. And just as you, just checking that you're able to unmute your mic and we can see you on the video, if that is okay on your side. We wondered if, Mr. Ramon, are you there? Just.
Yes, here I am. Do you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, nice to see you, Ramon. Maybe just walk us through a bit, thinking about, where migrants get their information from their journey. So from your interaction and experience with migrants that were arriving in Barcelona and the responsibilities that you had, where do they seem to get the information? And also, when we talk about the so-called migration information hubs in sending countries, what kind of information would you say they would be best laid out for migrants? Over to you, Ramon.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think we need to understand the reality of migration flows, how it works. Very often we think that migration is from one country to another country, from Filipinas to Spain, or from Mexico to Canada. But the reality very often is the migrations is from city to city, from a village to a city. And there's these migration networks that work as a real networks. And for example, in the case of Barcelona, it's not from Filipinas where we get people, it's from Batangas. Or in the case of Pakistan, it's not in the whole country, we get people from Gujarat. Or in the case of, for example, in Ecuador, the migration from Ecuador to Barcelona is from Guayaquil, it's not from Quito. So migration flows are from one point to another point. This is very important, because we need to understand where do migrants get the first information. So I think universally is a friend, is a relative, is a cousin, is someone a neighbor from his village that provides the information informally, and says, yes, come to work to Barcelona. There's a lot of work here. It's easy. It's good. So this is a classical and universal, I would say. So the question is this information that these people get reliable? So can we rely on this information from these networks? And I would say, well, not really at 100%, because it's also universal that migrants tend to portray their journey as a success. So they tend to, just portray the good things and to hide the bad things. So, and usually they say, all, for example, the red tape, all these procedures, they're never told, no? So the migrants, they want to portray themselves as successful, they are getting a good job, and you know, so the information is biased. No? So the information is biased. So it's a problem. It's a problem, no? And also, as someone said before of me, there's a lot of information in the social networks. So can we rely also on social networks about the information? Well, not always. No, there are hoaxes, there are fake news, there are not good information. So this is why I would think that information points in sending countries would be very important, no? to give real information about the procedures, about the labor rights, but not only about that, about things like the cost of life. Because, for example, a migrant from Honduras may earn 1,000 euros in Barcelona, and for someone from Honduras, 1,000 euros is a lot of money. And they said, oh, that's great. I'm going to earn 1,000 euros per month. That's a lot of money. But what is the cost of life in Barcelona? How much is going to cost me a room in Barcelona? It's 400 euros. So 40% of my rent, of my earnings, is going to pay to rent a room. So, okay, all this information should be provided, no? And very often it's not provided. So what we find is a migrant that enters, arrives to a city and goes to a family member, a cousin, knocks the door there. Oh, here I am. I just arrived from my country. Oh, I'm ready to work, no? And maybe the cousin says, okay, you can sleep in the couch for 1 week and then make your own way. So this is quite normal, no? This, I would advise to have these information hotspots in sending countries, no? It would be very important to deliver information. Nevertheless, I will focus on information points in the cities, okay? Which I've been working on the city of Barcelona for 15 years. And there we have created a one-stop shop or a hub for arriving people, no? For people who arrive from all over the world. And we provide, and we see what is the first needs of the people when they arrive. Now, the first need is information about the legal status. Because as Paddy said, half of the flows that arrive today at the city of Barcelona is in irregular situation. All the countries want legal pathways, legal migration. But the reality is that there's a big flows of irregular migration. So we find a lot of people in our cities with no papers or with resident status. Nevertheless, they are working in the informal economy. They live here. They bring their children. So there's a reality that we have to face, and we have to provide information about the legal situation, legal ways to regularize their situation, etc. No, labor market rights, no, labor rights. Even if they are irregular, they have rights too. Okay, so how to access the health? If they get sick, do they have to? How they're going to be access to a treatment? If they have the right, access to education. Another information that is very important, no, is providing free language courses, because language is very important for a migrant, just to find a job, to speak with the neighbors, just to live a normal life. So I would suggest receiving countries and receiving cities to provide as soon as possible free language courses for arriving people. And this should be part of the pack of what we call the welcome hubs, no, a welcome hotspots, no, for migrants, no. These information points upon arrival are key. And for another issue, housing, no, information about housing, no, it's so all these things should be provided, no, all these things, how the society works, etc. No, but migrants always tend to think in one thing: is work, and send some money home. No, that's the first priority during the first years upon arrival. No, and okay, that is good. This is normal. But also, we, as administrations, at the local administrations, we also should help to broaden the scope of their interests to the rest of the issues. And here is how we can also, in the city of Barcelona, we collaborate with networks of NGOs. We have a network of NGOs, of more than 160 NGOs who collaborate with the city. And there are all kinds of NGOs here, NGOs from migrants associations, but also from the church, from the labor unions, who help all together on providing this information. She's open arrival. Now we have these guides on arriving. What people have to do when you arrive. Register in the city. Get your health card. All these kinds, which are very important for a migrant. It's more like an information from the point of view of the person, okay? Because we are the local administration. I have to tell that I am speaking from the point of view of local administrations, which is quite different from states, okay? State is more in the macroeconomics, the flows of workers and GDP and things like and flows of money coming from one country to another one. But no, we are interested in the daily life of a city. Cities are built thanks to migration. All big cities in the world are great because of many migrants flows that have arrived along our history, and they have merged and they have succeeded in our cities, and this is something that we think it's going to continue in the future. So we have to make people's life easier, and provide all this information, practical information and legal information and rights information. And I will leave it here.
Ramon, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think it's been very interesting to hear that highlight sort of on the role that the local actors take, and particularly looking at the municipality and local administrations. I think that, one of the things that has been highlighted that has come out of not just engagements beyond the GCM deliberations, but it's sort of the role of the city in terms of becoming this, opening up the space for migrants to integrate. But I think also opening up the role of local administrations to act in spaces where national policies probably don't even allow, and trying to see where they can capture those gaps and be flexible to welcome the migrants as per se. And I will come back to you maybe in your reflection. It will be very interesting sort of to hear, with COVID, obviously we see it as a disruptor, but we also see it as a way of challenging where we've been sitting or where we've been sitting too long in terms of making a move. I mean, one of the things that stands out in this commitment for the GCM is not just the awareness raising that's there, but it's sort of creating initiatives that allow migrants to find information much more transparently, have access to different types of information for settling in, but also different types of information in which they could integrate and contribute to host communities. So maybe we can come back to you a bit later to hear from the experiences of the cities that you are aware of. How has COVID reshaped that role that cities have had? So for instance, speaking about the one-stop shop in Barcelona, how did that really change because of shutdowns, lockdowns? I mean, I think, Barcelona was one of the epicenters where possibly, even access to the center doesn't remain possible. How does that come in? What kind of changes and the uses of technology probably in terms of still accessing the services that were needed. Now we have a lot of questions that have been poured into the chat box, and I can already see hands. We have a tradition that we ask some speakers to be able to give us some questions. We have a very tight schedule, so I will ask for those who will raise their hands when you come, please be as direct and punctual to your question or to your reflection as possible, trying to keep it within a minute or so. Joanne Gloria, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Pari, our moderator. Thank you, our panelists. I just want to give some contribution into this very interesting topic of today, that Provision of information is an all-round responsibility, I want to believe so, from the government, from the recruitment agencies, from the migrants themselves, and from their destination countries per se. Because for one to migrate, you have to provide your own information as a migrant worker. And if you don't provide a proper information, then it will be difficult for people whom you're going to interact or the people who are going to facilitate your travel to be a hectic problem. Secondly, we have such information like the bilateral agreements between the countries. And if you find the country is not able to provide that kind of information to its own citizens who are willing to go out there, then it's going to be difficult for them to know exactly what they're going to face out there. Secondly, the same bilateral agreements from the destination countries. If those people from the destination country are not able to disseminate information to the migrants who have arrived, to the guests who have arrived, they will not be able to live well or in harmony together. Again, there's a part whereby you mentioned, Madam Pat, you mentioned that how do we bring all these stakeholders together to ensure that proper information is disseminated. For instance, if we can have trade unions in the middle of all these process of wanting to travel or to reach the other country, so that they are able to assist the migrant workers to travel and have the right information before they travel, it could be a good idea. But then again, these migrants, on the other hand, they would hide information to these entities like trade unions about their travel. For instance, they have this notion that maybe the trade union will ban me from traveling. They will not want me to go ahead and travel and have a better life that I want. And therefore they go in secrets. Nonetheless, when they face problems is when they want to seek the trade union to help them out. Therefore, that's why I think provision or dissemination or access of information is an all-round responsibility for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne. Gloria. Mr. Archele, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Turagabanye Arcel from Burundi. I have two questions. The first one, along procedures is observed for migrants who are in transit to the host countries. Some end up being discouraged and finally settled in Burundi. So what can be done to make the procedure short, at least to make the deadline more reasonable? And the second question is about migrants in process of being transferred to the destination countries. Are they well informed on what awaits for them to the other side? In particular, on the values of the native of this country, their way of life, in order to be adapted to it. Also about the notions of their language, in order to communicate better and integrate into the working environment. That are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Turagabanye, for that question. Mr. Baise, please go ahead. I think we just need you to unmute. Please go ahead.
Do you hear me? All right, thank you very much. So my contribution here, at the same time, a question. And it's always an issue of ego between returnees to the homeland, whereby they find it hard to reintegrate with companies that want to absorb them. Sometimes they just come in and chambers of commerce and trade union will be called upon to reabsorb these migrants that are coming back. without proper orientation from agencies that are responsible for that purpose. What are we doing about that? How do we give returnees some kind of orientation that, look, yes, you are going back to work, you are not working for government, you are working for private bodies, especially when it falls in the angles of private bodies. Look, this man has his own policies, this company has its own policies, and you have to work in line with that policies for growth. What are we doing in terms of orientation or giving orientation to the returnees? That's my question.
I say thank you very much for that question. Maybe we will ask our panelists, maybe starting with Lorena, to help us handle some of those questions. I think some are also kind of being repeated also and echoed rather in the chat box, really talking about you know, the role of kind of informing or making sure that information that's coming out of recruitment agencies preparing migrants provides the right information. I think there was also a question around coordination of actors. So I think, Lorena, that would be great to also hear, but also the other participants, some questions that were related to the procedures in terms of migrants information, integration related issues. And I think the last question around returnees, returns and how information is provided. So we can start with Lorena and go in that way to see what question, just feel free to address what works for you. Over to you, Lorena.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the questions and also for all the insights of the different panelists. In terms of the information, I think as you already heard, and I think a number of us already mentioned is, you know, while there are two areas. One, often we call them even awareness campaigns. So it's kind of the raising awareness on the risk of irregular migration, because we know also that when you travel in irregular without any clear objective where you're going, without a visa, etc., you remain invisible in the country where you're going to go. So the idea is to work, and that's why I think when we look at the objective, they are very much interlinked, is to look in terms of the negotiation of partnership and visas and programs between sending countries and the country of destination. I can tell you that here, for instance, in Nepal, we started, I don't know, 7-8 years ago with the first migrant resource centers. And then they became, the government say, we want them many more. So there are many spread around the countries with information on safe migration, what to look at, in terms of working with a recruiting agency, you know, and what question to ask, what to look out for, but also recruiting agency and the board for foreign employment here in Nepal does have packages of cultural orientation and, you know, orientation of a couple of days, 3 days, but clear information where people are going to go to. So what is important is if migrants, definitely they trust the information from the neighbor, from the family, friends, and that has been there before. But I also agree that migrants normally portray the positive pictures. Nobody wants to show failure. And I think that's very clear. But I think there are also information, and at least for Nepal, there's definitely a lot of efforts made in terms of informing migrants before they go. They provide about, in a normal years without COVID, is about 400,000 visa permits for work abroad. So these are very large numbers organized through the government, and the process is there. So there is work there. I'm sure there's more information. I believe that people may not be always very savvy in finding out everything on the tablets, on the telephone. But I believe that video-wise, everybody loves to watch little movies and things on the telephones. So I think information can be actually very dedicated with special videos in different languages that people can understand. Maybe they're not good at searching everybody, but they're definitely good at video stuff. So maybe this is part of the information and the efforts. And then I wanted to quickly jump on the issues of return. Like when we talk an experience of migration, the circle is completing when people come back home, because some decide to live abroad for forever, I mean for long term, but others may just have a 3, 4 years, 5 years experience and come back home. And I think what is important again is to look at the policy and the inclusion of migrants when we look at the economic opportunity as the economic and gain, the skills that migrants gain while abroad are definitely an asset also for the country of origin. So I think what we're working here is actually mapping the skills here in Nepal right now, as IOM is, for instance, looking at and supporting the government in mapping skills of migrants coming back home and how these skills can be of benefit to the local economy. I think there is a lot of things that can contribute, the same way that how to develop skills for people when they go on migration, they actually have better opportunity in terms of succeeding for a successful migration abroad. Skills that can be helpful here in the country of origin as much as abroad. So I think information is also what am I going to do abroad is something that is also often is not there when people are desperate, when people feel that there is no, migration is the only thing left. It's not one of the many options. And I think that's what we need to change as well, so that there's a little bit more efforts from all the partners involved in terms of providing opportunities, and then for the people to choose to migration is what I want to do. When you speak to migrants, there's a lot of many different stories. And I think we definitely feel that there's more that can be done to make that experience of migration a positive one and a gainful one for all. So I think there's a lot of work still that can be done, but I think that civil society have definitely a role to play, and work locally is important. And definitely countries where there's a lot of migration, I think everybody feels that it's going to be successful if they go abroad. So feeling that you're failing if you're not going abroad. So we have to find a balance between this opportunity and mobility being there, but also making sure that you have the information so that you don't find yourself that you're actually in a worse situation going abroad rather than staying at home and developing work and opportunity there.
Yeah. Thank you, Lorena, for that. I think, just roping in the paradigm shift, isn't it? I think also for migrants, and I'm reminded of the project Migrants as Messengers from IOM as well, right? That where you are actually using migrants to bring out messages of what's really happening and what the journeys have entailed, and what the experiences actually are. And I think also with COVID, we have seen not everybody sort of being locked down at home, but also I think being able to voice out some of the challenges that migrants have faced, as remittances are dwindling, and also migrants are finding it difficult, I think, to make ends meet on the other side, to be able to up the volume on the remittance front. So I think all this seems, very connected. Thank you for sharing on that. Aaron, do you want to just share with us, some responses, but also a reflection of some of the questions we've asked you before?
Yeah, very good question related with the information and integration. So from the perspective, I would say that from my experience, from the perspective of the institution, Mexican and Canadian institutions, and even the private institutions that organize this program, the seasonal agricultural worker program, the information is not needed for migrants. They don't need it, this information. They don't have to be integrated. Why? Why integrated? They don't need it. So that's why they don't worry about providing these different information, because they just temporary, they are workers. They need information related to work, because if you think of information related with improve our health, our lives as a humans, of course you need information. But if you think of the worker as just workers, they need to know how many hours they are going to work, how much money they are going to get, what activities they are going to do, and that's it. So this is the idea of this globalization, these labor patterns, not just in Canada, well, also in Mexico, because or Australia or Germany or England or France or all where these kind of patterns are reproduced. I think this is the idea, yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I come, Akhil?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of things to add on what Lorena said about the reintegration of how to provide information for migrants to reintegrate better. As you said earlier, the such information should start from the pre-return period. I mean, they're kind of the effort should start from the pre-return period to train themselves, especially on financial literacy and how to allocate their savings, etc., and how they can reintegrate. I mean, whether they want to work back in the country or they want to find self-employment, and how the migrants with economic capital should reintegrate, and how migrants with human capital should reintegrate, and how migrants with both who do not have both capital, like especially retired migrants and migrants who are critically ill, how they can reintegrate. And such kind of information provision should be there in the pre-return period itself. And the government should seriously, all stakeholders should seriously think about such information, and that would be very helpful for the migrant workers, because at the stage of return, once they are returned, there is always a stage of dilemma, nothing else. And that stage should not be created. And that is all about the reintegration. And other thing is about the coordination among or between the stakeholders. And I think trade unions also have an important role to play once they have returned, because often it's very difficult for the workers to reintegrate back to the domestic labor market. It's often difficult and it's challenging, and that leads to often disputes as well. So trade unions should find a way out, and how to find solutions to how they can contribute to the reintegration especially. And this is effort, the coordination should come from the top. The government and other, even the UN agencies also can play a role in bringing together all stakeholders for disseminating better information. Yeah, that's all from myself.
Akil, thank you very much. And I think the inputs that come from research are very important to feed back into programs that are meant to provide information along the path of the migrants. So I think that some of the reflections that you also gave earlier were absolutely pertinent, not just, and I think reinforced also by Rossitz, who talked about, language related aspects, but also Ramon, who came in and shared with us about the role of the community and how they can be used to support information. Rossitz, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Patty. I wanted to build up a little bit on a couple of points that I've heard within the questions in the chat as well, which were mentioning a little bit the existence of a lot of fake news on digital platforms, or fake information, false information, misleading information. What do we do to compensate that? How can we react to that? Also, how did COVID influence the whole situation with information? What do we do with pre-orientation of people who want to leave? And I definitely feel that the digital aspect of our project definitely links all of these things together. And I'm going to give an example actually by a previous project when I was involved as a counselor for Bulgarian migrants in Germany. So when COVID started and we entered a complete lockdown, all of the information services for counseling agencies, all of them were closed. And none of them had a plan what they were going to do with their regular advice seekers who were actually left without any appointment suddenly. And in that previous project, we were actually with professional Facebook profiles in all the Facebook groups where migrant people are actually members of, and when they're asking questions to others. For example, Polish people in Berlin. Hey everyone, I lost my job. What do I do? They don't want to pay me for the last month and I'm thinking of returning to my country. What do I do? And of course, in those groups, there's a lot of false pieces of advice, a lot of people who can mislead you. But here comes the part of the professionals. Once we enter those spaces, we can compensate for that false information that is being spread. Because what's happening, trolls, robots, people who want to harm other people, they're not going to leave the digital spaces. They're there to stay, and they'll do more and more of what they're doing. So us denying all the digital spaces too dangerous because of fake news, that's not serious. We need to be there, and we need to flood those spaces with good information, with quality information, so that it's much more than the rest that is being published in there. And what happens is that when I would reply to one question with all the links, with all the information, go to this website, fill out this form, here's a translation of this form and all of that, I'm not just giving that information to that person. The 200 people reading the comments, they also have that. They also take the screenshots, they give it to their friends. So maybe I just advised one person, but that person became multiplied that information to all their contacts. So that could be an extremely powerful tool just to compensate. It's not the only way, but it is one way. And what also happens is that we discovered that a lot of people who are members of those groups who are actually for migrants in Germany, some people already from their home country were entering those groups to ask people who already live in that country, hey everyone, how did you do this? How did you do that? Can I go with my driving license from home? Or all of those questions were there. So even for pre-orientation, it could be extremely useful. And spreading different information graphs and forms, it could be extremely useful to just for it to be there. And also people who were thinking about leaving during COVID, because a lot of people just started returning, and especially within the European Union, these are people who know that they could come back after that, they don't need a visa. So they were like, okay, let me just return home and wait out the pandemic. A lot of those people didn't know that even though they lost their job, they can't just pick up their bags and go if they want to return one day, because there are a lot of administrative things you still need to take care, even if you want to leave, so that you don't end up in debt or so that you don't end up having problems when returning. So if they don't know that, and if we're not there, to really spread that information on the platforms where they are, then that's another missed opportunity. So what COVID showed us is that we cannot afford not to be where people are looking for information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I think some very direct examples in how, there's just not just corporate responsibilities. I mean, we've also, something that we haven't touched here is sort of the role of media houses and the role of digital tech and high-tech companies in terms of moderating and ensuring that misinformation and false information is not going out there. But I think some very practical information there on how also individuals, so, using migrants, professionals, and all of us in a way, and how we are kind of responsible for ensuring that the right information goes in the right spaces. Thank you for that, for sharing those reflections. Ramon, do you want to give us your reflections as we are ready to wrap up?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I very briefly, I totally agree with Aaron Diaz. I think there's a lot of stakeholders and institutions who see migrants only as labor force, not as human beings. And I think this is a big mistake, because as we know, many temporary workers won't be temporary, and they will end up staying in Canada or wherever. And this we only have to learn and to study a little bit the history of migration and the big errors in the past. For example, in Germany, in the 60s of the past century, they had this policy on Gastarbeit. I mean, they saw migrants as guests, and if you're a guest, someday you will go back to your country of origin. Yes, it's true. All migrants want to go back somehow, the country of origin, but very little do at the end. Many of them, they remain in the place. So I think it has to change this approach, absolutely. And about this information on returnees, I would also want to share that in the case of Europe, which is only one small part of the world, but in the case of Europe, the European Union is investing much money on return than in integration. This is the reality. It's investing tons of money, of millions of euros, on promoting return to the countries of origin. So a person can enter a program on return and can be there for 2 months preparing the return to the country of origin. So it's a paradox, And sometimes they're more investing in return than the information on people who's arriving, And this is it's happening, And EOM, for example, is contributing a lot on the return programs. It's participating in many return programs in Europe, And I think we have this. We cannot, for example, finally, to rely only the information on the departure, no, on agencies, no, because agencies are interested in the labor union, in the labor part only, no, migrants as labor force, no, and therefore they will provide only this specific kind of information and not the whole picture of the country on the city, no, and hotspots in sending countries, they face a big challenge, no, because for example, from Filipinas, they migrate, Filipinos migrants, they migrate maybe to 30 countries, no? So you have to have the information of 30 countries, and you have to have the information of 30 countries updated, because regulations change every day. So in Spain are different from Italy and from France and from the United States and from Australia. So you have to have all the information of all aspects of the society in sending countries. So this is, well, I think it's a challenge, and we should have these hotspots of information of everything in sending countries, and but also in the receiving countries and receiving cities, which would be perhaps easy because you have the information there, no, and you provide the information to migrant who is going to live there, no, and the information is going to be accurate and correctly. No? That's it. Thank you.
Ramon, thank you very much. And I think those reflections absolutely are very useful in terms of us looking how we are not just making, information accessible, but, the how, and who is involved. I think it's becomes very critical. And also in terms of being able to understand that an information overload could also could inhibit access in this way. So I think in terms of who the different actors that are involved is particularly very important. Before I will call Professor Camelia Tigao from GRFDT to give us some reflections, I just want to go around on the panelists, starting again with Lorena on your 1 minute, sort of if there's any, the boiling issues. The GCM was signed 2018. We are a couple of years ahead. We've talked about and covered quite a number of different challenges, quite a number of different initiatives that have come out in terms of how to steer this particular objective forward in providing migrants with not just accurate, but also timely information along the stages of the migration and in their paths. Are there kind of some reflections that you think, 2022, the challenges remain for us moving forward? Where should we be focusing our energies and our intentions on? Lorena, starting with you.
Well, it's we can't change everything in such a short time. Migration was not even in the arena. There was not even a UN migration agency. IOM was, became the migration agency for the UN only in 2016. So honestly, I think that there is a good progress, but there's much more to go. Maybe one of the elements, though, that is tying together all the objective is the partnership, is the collaboration and the working with, we are not going to find a solution if we take only one stand. So I think the much more engagement, we talk about, and I think this type of forum has also a proof of that, but I think there's much more work that needs to be done. And the dialogue and the work cross type of organization, government needs to be there. So this cooperation needs to go beyond, the voice of the migrants is definitely strong, but I think the engagement of countries needs to be there. Migrants alone won't be able to find the solutions. They need to have the, country of origin and also to work with host countries. Host countries need to come to terms that regular migration will be of benefit. And the numbers that we are seeing, if we look at Europe, we are an aging continent. So we definitely need more, I'm Italian and definitely I can talk for the Italian. If we don't have migrants, we are going to be struggling very much in the next 10 years or so. They already actually contributed enormously. So I think there is a win-win dynamics that is there. So it's a question of good governance. And I think this is what needs to continue. Don't give up. I think COVID put us a little back in terms also what the migration network, that is the other element that maybe we didn't have time to discuss, but definitely the UN migration network and working together is definitely a path in the right directions. Attention has been on COVID specifically, and we can't blame that. And I think that has been hit at all of us. But I think even in that sense, making sure the migrants are included. I mean, they are part of society. They are not much more. There's much more contribution of migrants in the community, in the host community, than what the host community is losing from having migrants there. Not at all. So I think this is something that we need to communicate differently on that front. Thank you very much for having me, and definitely has been a very big pleasure and listening to all the speakers tonight also. And thank you for the organizations. Very well done.
Thank you, Lorena, for those reflections. Akil.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, things are moving on a right direction, especially in this part of the world where Abu Dhabi Dialogue brought out the comprehensive information orientation program that plans to replicate the Philippines model, like 3 sets of orientation programs like pre-employment and pre-departure and post-arrival. But yeah, I mean, we have yet to see the results, but things are moving on the right direction. And even today, the Abu Dhabi Dialogue is happening. So there was some tedious discussions about the CIOP also occurred. But yeah, I mean, but these initiatives should make sure or should ensure the interest of all parties. It should protect the sovereignty of the host countries and the interests of the origin states, and most importantly, the rights of the migrant workers. So I'm stopping here. Thanks a lot for this opportunity, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Akil. Always very enriching to have you with us. Dr. Diaz, do you want to just share with us your reflections? Aaron?
Yeah. Well, just we as before mentioned, we still a lot of work to do, and I would say start to deconstruct the ideas of migration, migrants, these American dreams. This start to strengthen the communities. It's a lot of work to do, and we can use, as they mentioned before, the digital information, but also we have to understand that not everyone can have this access, this right to this kind of internet or information by internet. So we have to start working, in different arenas, and not because if we start think that everyone has access or can use internet, we will even reproduce this polarization, so we start thinking that the different possibilities in different towns and countries. Well, just that's it. And thank you very much for this organization of this event and the invitation.
Thank you, Aaron. I mean, just saying that reminds me of how amazing to hear, for instance, how Telemundo, which is very far away coming from the Americas, has had its impact on the African continent and have people glued onto it. So I think interesting to hear how information can be gathered from different networks. Rossitz, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's really perfect what Aaron just mentioned about the necessity that we work from all perspectives, taking into consideration all sides and all, and trying to close all the gaps. Precisely, that's what we're doing, because I was all the time really tailoring everything I was talking about to the German context. Germany, it's a different one. And again, as I mentioned, analog offers are pretty good and widespread, but it's really just the digital that's lagging behind here. Nevertheless, our project is really just at the beginning, and what we're doing, we're testing what's possible, what can work, what could be a good idea to recommend to different stakeholders, what could be useful to other geographies as well. We will be publishing our results towards the end of this year, beginning of the following one, and we'll have much more information of how this is actually working. So it would be great to stay in touch with some of you for further collaborations and networking. Thank you so much for having me today, and yes, all the best.
Thank you so much, Rossitz, for those reflections. Ramon.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. And very quickly, I would say Objective 3 on the Global Compact on Migration, it's an opportunity. I think it's very interesting what is written there, but we should broaden the scope a little bit on the type of information needed to be provided to migrants. No, for example, things like the human aspects of the human dimension of immigration, which is sometimes forgotten. No, things like skill recognition, for example, we haven't talked about that, but it is very crucial, and a lot of things can be done. And things about non-discrimination also, and rights like this, no? Because sometimes migrants are going to go to some communities who might be tensions there, and maybe not everybody is going to welcome there. So they have to know the rights they have about these non-discrimination issues, no? And I think this has, if they don't know, they don't know how they have rights, no? So, and finally, I would suggest also to include information for irregular migrants. Irregular migrants also in receiving countries should have the right to receive information about their rights and their situations and their legality. No? And finally, if I may, I'd like to, all these hot spots or welcome hubs like the one we have in Barcelona, the one it's going to be built in Milano, Italy, to be supported by governments, because at the end it makes easier this process, and it's a win-win for everybody, no? Also for migrants, for receiving communities, for sending countries.
Ramon, thank you for that. Like I heard somebody said, if we have investment centers that provide information for investors, why shouldn't we have migrants welcome centers that provide information to an important part of our society and our communities who contribute to development? So absolutely, I think that call falls in the right space for us to digest and think about how we can take it forward. I just wanted, to thank our panelists, but before we will close, I will ask Professor Camelia Tigao to come and just give us like a 3-minute reflection. Apologies again that we have run way over time, but I think usually this particular topic and webinar takes us, just a little bit longer to digest. Professor Camelia, do you want to just share with us your reflections?
Yes, thank you so much, Patty. Thanks to all the panelists, and we've heard a lot on the alternative and official perspectives on what the information should be like for migrants. I would like to raise a couple of more issues to think about just before we leave. One of them is how the information for migrants can also become information around migration, and how that will affect the receiving of migrants. And also about what is a relation between information and communication. The information is a one-way process. Communication can be considered as a two-way process. So really information can be more useful if we have this two-way process of communication, if we hear from migrants and give back that information. I just put in the chat an example of what we call fanzines in Mexico, which are, little brochures of information for migrants in transit and return. And these brochures were made by communicating with migrants and hearing what information they need in the process of their displacement. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the broader context, not just the COVID context, just to remind you this anti-migrant discourse and this anxiety about migration, how it creates a source of political capital in many of the countries that receive migrants. So one big concern that we have is the information around migration, not just information for the migrants themselves. We have this context of misinformation about migrants that can affect, and migrants can get lost in this ocean of xenophobic details that further impedes their movement towards countries of destination. They impede their circulation. Their information can affect their mental and physical integrity. And this is what Rosina talked about, right? Why does this happen? It can be a topic of discussion for the GCM in the future. We have this motivated reasoning from people for communities that receive migrants. We have in the human nature, it is this tendency to accept information that is more according to existing beliefs. So if people believe that migrants are going to be a public charge, then they are more prone to not value migrants as communities who help, actually. And there's been a lot of work at the Migration Policy Institute of what should be done. Colleagues have outlined how misinformation can sometimes be accidental, but can also be planned. So we have to deal with this broader context of communication. So I know I have to end. I will just raise one last idea. The actors involved in the process of communication and information for migrants are very diverse. We have here today very different perspectives. We have international organizations, we have NGOs, activists, religion, media, public opinion. We have politicians, public opinion leaders, presidents, and they all have their own interest in the process of migration. So their interests are sometimes contradictory and are opposed in terms of migration management and communication. Maybe that is something that we should take into account. I will just conclude with a very basic idea. Communication on migration is just a very important field of study, of action, with direct consequences, I would say, on the life of migrants, the actors involved, not just migrants, but also diasporas. So thank you so much. This is all I have to say, just to end in time.
Professor Camelia, thank you very much, I think, for giving us a good wrap up, but also some very important food for thought there as we move forward. Again, thank you firstly to also the participants, the students, and those who are, friends of GRFDT, friends of the different organizations that have put this webinar together in the context of the Global Compact for Migration Certificate Program. A special thanks to all our panelists, Ms. Lorena Lando, thank you for being here. Mr. Akil, thank you for being here. Ms. Rossitz Mandy, thank you for being here. Mr. Ramon Sanahuya Vales, thank you for finding time to be here. Dr. Diaz Menduburo, thank you again, and thanks to everyone for joining us and for enduring with us for taking way over time for this very important subject. We will reconvene next week, every Tuesday, as we do on the GCM webinars, and the next webinar is looking at GCM Objective number 4, and we will be publishing the advert with all the necessary information, same joining time, same link, but obviously a different panel to deliberate on that very important topic as well, that is looking at legal identity and documentation. And for the students who are joining us, we will share with you information in the Google Classroom in terms of the next unit that we'll be covering this Saturday at the same time with the relevant information that has already been shared. Again, thank you very much. Have a good morning, a good afternoon, and good night to those in Asia Pacific. Goodbye. Thank you.